Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of Fire Emblem Pitfalls, where I'll go over some common mistakes and misconceptions in the Fire Emblem series. If you haven't checked out part 1, I recommend doing just that, since I also provide a short explanation of why I'm making these videos. And I also explain that I'm not doing this just to talk down to people. Now, one quick correction, I have actually finished a couple of draft playthroughs, so technically I have some LTC experience. I lied, sorry. Shoutouts to everyone who watched and especially commented on part 1. It means quite a lot to me that people are finding these videos useful. At number 4, we've got not using dancers. Dancers, bards, songstresses, herons. There's one of these in pretty much every Fire Emblem game, and they all look a little bit different, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to call them dancers. They are frail, usually have less mobility than most of the cast, and their offense is generally non-existent. Their main purpose is to revitalize other units so they can move again, though some of them have additional perks as well. Dancers are very rewarding if used correctly, and either mediocre or very punishing if not. They're really good units, but not in the way your usual Fire Emblem Juggernaut character is. You can't really field them and just go from turn to turn, moving them to wherever you see fit, and hope things work out. You have to accommodate them, making sure they're always out of enemy range, but capable of refreshing your other units. It's a bit tedious, and it's understandable that people who just want to blaze through the game decide against deploying them at all. But dancers have amazing potential if you do plan out their usage, and I think it's very satisfactory to do so. The crazy strategies you can pull off with dancers are just so many. They can give a character the ability to move 5 or 6 extra squares in one turn, kill off an extra enemy on player phase, enable fancy quick finishes of chapters with the warp and rescue staffs. A dancer will usually add more to your party than your 10th best fighter, or even your best fighter. Just make sure to always check enemy ranges to keep them safe, since dancers severely impact the effectiveness of your enemy phase if they get attacked, and they can even get killed. Sometimes you have to get creative and make use of tools such as the barrier staff or the shelter skill to make sure your dancer lives through the turn. Now at number 5, we've got making use of the rescue and trade commands. When you're going through a linear map, and let's be honest, a lot of maps in Fire Emblem are linear, especially the recent ones, it's often tempting to move your units around in a giant block, and the front ones get to kill a few enemies, but the back ones tend to have nothing to do. Or do they? There's 2 great and easy ways to make use of dead time at the back of your army. One of them is rescuing or pairing up. Mounted units tend to get ahead of your packs of foot units, but if all your foot units are doing is lagging behind, then why would you even need to bring them at all? Why not carry them along with your mounted units and then drop them off the next turn? You can even use another unit to drop them off during the same turn, just to get a few extra squares of movement for free. If you look for these opportunities, you'll surely find them. Dancers make great recipients for this kind of strategy because they're usually less mobile than your other characters. And the place where you might want them to dance isn't always the place where you want them to be on enemy phase. So have them dance, then pick them up and drop them further ahead, so their dance is more effective next turn. Trading is another good thing that characters can do. It usually doesn't even cost your turn of attacking if you do it properly. My favorite use of trading is to have a character use a strong weapon on player phase to kill a tough enemy, and then having someone else swap a javelin to the top of their inventory, so they can counter all these ranged pests on enemy phase. This is especially effective in games where enemies don't put up much of a resistance against these weak weapons, like in FE7, 8, 9, and 10, and the easier difficulties of several other titles as well. At number 6, we have always training the main characters. Recent Fire Emblem games have taught us all that the main character is awesome, especially if they're self-inserts. It makes a lot of sense to make required units really powerful, because otherwise they would be a drag to use all game long. But did you know there's a couple of units in older Fire Emblem games that are disguised as important to your success, when they're really actually more trouble than they're worth? The best examples of this are Lyn and Eliwood from FE7. The game seems to be trying to tell you to use them. On your first playthrough, you are forced to use both Lyn and Eliwood in their respective modes. They might even seem okay, because in normal mode the enemies are just really weak. But once you're tackling the only actual hard mode in the game, called Hector Hard Mode, I recommend leaving these 2 off your roster whenever you can. Both Lyn and Eliwood use swords, but for some reason just about half of the enemies in this game use lances, so they'll be fighting with weapons flying with disadvantage all along. Swords do not have any strong ranged weapons like javelins or hand axes, so they will not be able to counterattack a lot of enemies, so swords actually kinda suck. Eliwood also spends most of the game with no horse, and Lyn can't even learn how to ride one, so they will often be left in the dust by the many powerful mounted units in this game. such as Marcus, Kent, Sane, Lowen, Florina, and Heath. If you're going to accommodate a foot unit, you might as well make it one that's actually really strong. Even though their growths are good, they have their issues stat-wise. Lyn actually has the lowest durability in the game when it comes to HP and defense, so while she's really fast, she will often be at the risk of death during enemy phase. Her avoid is good, but it's not reliable, especially not against lance users. As for Eliwood, he's a bit bulkier, but he's no tank early on, and to make it worse, he's a lot slower. It takes him so many speed level ups just to start doubling in Nectar hard mode. And contrary to what you might think, not training these two will never make the game much harder for you. They are force deployed in some maps, including the final one, but it's so easy to keep them safe, oftentimes at the starting point. I think it's easier to protect them in those 4 or 5 maps than to deal with their shortcomings all game long, though this does require a bit of knowledge of FE7. Roy is also an example of this. There is no harm in getting him a couple of levels here and there in FE6, but due to his late promotion and sword luck, he is never going to be an outstanding unit. FE6 combines large maps with siege objectives, so to get Roy to the throne or the gate, it's often quicker to have him in some unit saddlebags than to have him walk on his own 2 feet. When Roy does finally promote, he can do some major damage to Manakete enemies with the Binding Blade even at base level. And yes, that includes the final boss. Maybe not enough to get 1 round KO, but you don't need him to. Shadow Dragon Marth is the last example of a really subpar lord. In a game where most units can reclass into something broken like Dragonite, or at least something reasonably useful like Hero, it sucks for Marth to be stuck in an unmounted sword-locked class. Like in FE7, the vast majority of enemies wield lances, reducing Marth's already mediocre attack power to a weapon triangle disadvantage, which makes the rapier a lot worse as well. While I believe these specific examples are pitfalls, most other lord characters in the series are not, and some of them are even the best units in their respective games. So the lesson to take away from them is, this pitfall is not never use your lords, but rather make sure they are units worth investing in before you do so. Usually training your lord is a good idea because they are automatically deployed, but if they're actually poor fighters, then it's easier to just leave them alone and deal with the consequences. At number 7, we've got using 1 unit of every class. Fire Emblem has a lot of different units of a lot of different classes. The different weapon types with their advantages and disadvantages encourage you to try and diversify your squad. And so do the different objectives like defense, siege, route, etc. And even the different specialties of your units. Some are very bulky, some are fast, some have high strength, and so on. It makes you think Fire Emblem is a bit like the Pokemon games where you want a very diversified team to tackle varied opponents, but not all Fire Emblem classes are created equal. In fact, the class system is very imbalanced. The best example of this are the Cavaliers and Paladins in GBA Fire Emblem games. They are so much better than the infantry classes like Mercenary and Fighter. They have more weapon types, more movement, and all the advantages that come with being mounted. The infantry classes would have to be way better at combat to compensate for this, and oftentimes they don't even come close. What's more, the increased flexibility of a mounted unit means that even if their combat isn't sufficient, they can usually still find a purpose on the battlefield, such as varying other units. Dark Flyers are another good example of an overpowered class, this time from Awakening. Flying and Gale Force are unmatched traits to have. If a unit is capable of reaching promoted level 15 reasonably quickly, there is no reason not to get Gale Force on them and have them rush through the maps. The Fire Emblem games could compensate for this imbalance by creating maps, objectives, or enemies that require a more varied team composition. In theory, for example, the higher durability of a general should help in a defense map more than extra mobility of a paladin would. Unfortunately, that tends not to be the case in practice. There are some, perhaps unintentional attempts at nerfing overpowered classes through map design, such as the use of impeding terrain and enemies using effective weapons, but they tend not to be very successful, and players will find ways around them. On the flip side, there could have been ways to make players utilize weaker classes, such as archers, for example through clever placement of ballista. But these instances are very rare, and not worth putting up with a weak archer in the long term. So when you're deciding who to use, you should try not to think in terms of how many of this class do I already have, or what class am I missing from my roster, but rather you should be thinking, how good is this unit's class? Chances are if you're already using 4 paladins, they were a good choice, and you shouldn't hesitate about adding a 5th. That's going to be it for part 2. I'd like to give a shout out to the people that made or helped me get the artwork I use in this video. It's much better than anything I could have done in Microsoft Paint. Last but not least, thanks to you for watching. The way things are looking right now, I've only got enough material left for one more part, and I hope you'll be there to see that too. See ya!